Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this ESCoE webinar on the subject of evidence on productivity growth from VAT data on UK companies, 2005 to 2024. We'll just wait a minute or two as more people join, but in a few minutes we'll have Russell Black talk topic. By ways of introduction, Russell's a PhD student at King's Business School and an economics researcher at DBT, currently on loan from the Office for National Statistics. Russell will talk for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to have a discussion by Nick Vaughan. We're grateful to have here today as well. So Nick Vaughan's chair of the advisory panel on national accounts for the ONS, and he's a former director of national accounts and economic statistics at the ONS. So just in terms of housekeeping, we'll have 10 minutes for your questions at the end of the talk after Russell's talk and Nick's discussion. So if a question occurs to you during the talk, you should be able to add it in the Q&A feature as we're going. And then when we get to the end, we can pick on the questions or ask people to unmute as appropriate. But it looks like numbers are kind of stabilizing now. We've got a good audience for you, Russell. I'll stop talking and hand over to you for the next 40 minutes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me properly. The disclaimers apply. So what do we want to look at? We want to look at the reasons for the fall in UK productivity growth, and how much this falling UK productivity growth is the fall in economic dynamism versus the fall in other factors contributing to productivity growth. It's now 2026. I think everyone is aware that our productivity growth in the UK is much lower than it used to be before the Great Financial Crisis, in common with more or less the rest of the world. And the UK's growth has been particularly sharp as a drop, so the UK is a useful case study in why productivity growth is dropping. Specifically today, I'm going to talk about how we can bring new data sources, a new data source, which is VAT data, to try and answer that question. The literature this is fitting into is these 3 paragraphs here of text. So incorporating VAT data into economic analysis and economic statistics. Many people have already been doing that, including, well, everyone at HMRC, so I didn't even put them in this list. But in particular, Cameron, Meehan, and LeBon and Wheel, and many people in ONS who have also been attempting to, have also been working to add in more data from VAT into economic statistics in different ways. On the literature on the decline dynamism, I'm not going to talk about that more. We can talk about it in discussion. For business dynamism, we care about observing firms at many points in time. We need to see how is the firm growing, how is the firm growing its employment share, how is the firm growing its productivity, how do these things interact? This is not what the ONS economic surveys do. The ONS economic surveys are designed to not do this. The ONS economic surveys are designed to not annoy the business people filling out the surveys as much as possible, while also collecting the best possible economic data. They do this by rotating firms in and out, so that the burden on responding to the ONS on our businesses is shared across as many businesses as possible. This is great, except if you're trying to track businesses over time. Thus, we look to see how we can use other data sets that do in fact track businesses over time. And today it's VAT. The consistency and usefulness of the VAT data for this purpose of tracking the economic output of businesses over time is mixed. And I'll show you lots of charts and tables in more detail on this. Nonetheless, it's still worth me coming and showing you, and there's some novel findings here on how the UK's productivity growth is happening in different ways to how it used to be. We seem to have not as much productivity growth coming through from new started firms as used to be the case. but existing continuing firms themselves, they're growing stronger inside firms. So I'll get onto that as well at the end. So I'll talk through what the VAT data looks like and what I've done to it. I'll talk through how the VAT data compares with our existing data, and then a bit more unpacking how the aggregate productivity growth looks different over time using the VAT data tracking firms over time. The main data set I'm going to use is the ONS Annual Business Survey. So the ONS Annual Business Survey is the ONS's workhorse large survey of businesses. It's badly named. It's a hybrid survey census. So it is a survey of SMEs, and it is an economic census of large companies. So approximately 8 million to 9 million workers are covered by the annual business survey every year out of the total UK workforce of 35 million. So it's not a full economic census, it's a partial economic census. And it is specifically written of how is your business contributing to GDP, specifically for that purpose. And it's not fast. VAT data. As everyone knows here, probably because you all pay VAT every day on your purchases, value-added tax is one of the key UK taxes. Key European taxes. UK is fully harmonized. UK adopted VAT with the EU Ascension, the EEC Ascension in 1973. And it's already used by ONS to supplement many of the surveys. One may even mention a bit of that later on. I'm using 188 million VAT returns of all the firms that are valid to use VAT, which is £90,000 a year. The threshold is high internationally, but £90,000 is still basically nothing in economic terms. That's enough to keep maybe one worker alive. So basically anyone who is substantively as a business has to be in VAT. The VAT data is reported at high frequency. So 10% of firms report monthly. The rest basically report for quarters. You don't have to report calendar quarters. You can report for any quarter you like. So it's either monthly or quarterly data. The key factor about the VAT data is that it's not that much data per return. So we only have 9 questions that firms have to write on their VAT form. That VAT form looks like this before they moved it all online, by the way. Just to show you these.
Just 1 second. There seems to be a technical issue. So there's a bunch of comments saying that some people can see the slides and some cannot right now. So some of the people who couldn't see their slides, do you mind just putting in the chat if that's changed?
Okay, I've restarted sharing my screen if that makes any difference.
Okay, so some people, yeah, couldn't see before but can see now. So we're taking that as a yes. Okay, people can see now. So apparently sharing and resharing was good. Okay, sorry, I'll let you continue. Sorry about that.
Okay, apologies to the people who've missed the data. Let me skip to. This is the key diagram here. So VAT expenditure, the VAT form requires firms to report their total turnover and their total purchases. Their total purchases includes all of their capital expenditure, includes all of their inventory they're building up, and includes all of their goods and services bought for resale. This is not what we want. For economic productivity, gross value added, we need a measure of intermediate consumption that excludes these things. It is only once the inventories go into production that we treat them as intermediate consumption in all of economic measurement. And capital expenditure is not intermediate consumption. Capital expenditure is a separate thing. The red bolded things are the important things here. The VAT exempt businesses are small, and the other things are, well, we can talk about them, but the main massive problems of using the VAT data are we only have a total line item for total VAT expenditure, which includes capital expenditure inventories. and goods and services bought for resale. The benefit of that is it's comprehensive. All companies have to put in. The benefit is fast. It comes in quarterly detail. The minuses are there is little detail, and solving this adds some biases to the data. So I will, for the next few minutes, give a high-level overview of what is the procedure to estimate gross output and intermediate consumption in GVA based on the reported VAT data, which is essentially just quite basic. We're going to minus some fractions off the total purchases. This limits the usefulness to what's in the quotes, the core industries. So for all the tables from now on will be only manufacturing, construction, and services, excluding services that are public sector services or mostly non-market services. This is a bullet point list of all of the data processing steps and the problems. Actually, the first problem, in fact, is that some companies don't report VAT data. Large enterprise groups are allowed to report VAT data on a group basis. So there is everything is being matched to the interdepartmental business register. So there needs to be apportionment from the VAT group level to the interdepartmental business level of what is a company. So that is done by weighted employment shares inside groups. Quarterly data is apportioned to months just by dividing by 3. There's a more sophisticated things you could do there that have been tried. The next 2 bullet points are the key steps for the basic most way of converting or attempting to estimate intermediate consumption from the total VAT purchases, which is firstly that spikes will be eliminated. And secondly, the turnover data or the monthly and quarterly purchases will only be used to estimate a medium-term purchases ratio. So for each firm, for each 18-month period, I calculate what is the rolling purchases sale ratio as their intermediate consumption propensity. And then that is used rather than using the actual data month by month on what the companies are buying. So it doesn't matter at what point when they're buying something over these 18 months. I'm going to assume that it is coming in and out of the firm's inventory along these 18 months. That's in the absence of any other data on stock buildup, essentially the only thing you can do. And then finally, fractions are deducted from the purchases to account for capital disposals and capital acquisitions. So for large companies where an annual business survey form exists and the annual business survey form says, yes, this company spent 15% of its total purchases on capital goods, then I apply that 15% to that company's VAT data. For small businesses, it's industry and size band. So where the average small retailer spends 3% of their purchases on capital items, that's deducted from the VAT form for all of the size band and all of the industry band. Finally, there are 3 outlier filters, that are applied to the data. So the most extreme companies by labor productivity level, by annual labor productivity growth, and by annual employment share change, they're all designated as outliers. So for high frequency information from the VAT data, I'm only taking the high frequency data from what companies are reporting on their turnover. The high frequency data from their purchases, unless HMRC decides that actually the high frequency data from purchases is going to be split down into different margins, I'm not sure there is much you can take from this, other than for observing the VAT data itself. So the GVA estimates from the VAT data will be the short-term turnover multiplied by the medium-term purchases ratio. So the firm level productivity will only change as long as the medium-term purchases ratio bandwidth is. Bandwidth doesn't actually make much difference if you vary it. Everything from here on will be using the 18-month. but that's what's happening. It depends what we want to use the VAT data for. Do we want to use the VAT data because it's timely, because it comes faster than the other data sources, or do you want to use the VAT data because it's comprehensive, because we have all companies and we're still looking at annual growth over time of all companies, and how much this matters? I mentioned enterprise group apportionment. This is becoming less of a problem over time, but just to show you that it is still a substantial number of data from the VAT system that we're getting. This is based on enterprise groups and not on individual companies. The apportionment required is still a substantial fraction. How do the different methods for applied to the for calculating intermediate consumption work? So the most dotted line is the basic estimate of total intermediate consumption for the core industries from the VAT data, rising from 1.5 trillion to 3 trillion. More sophisticated apportionment inside enterprise groups by using industry weighting changes it a bit, especially in the 2020s. And applying the medium-term sales purchases ratio versus taking the quarterly and monthly data raw. You can see on the graph this doesn't actually change it because it shouldn't. It's only sort of moving things around rather than actually changing the level. And you can't really see an effect on this graph because the scale is in trillions of pounds and it's massive. I show you the same graph, but this is for the GVA estimates. You can see that there's a bit more effect. So the basic estimate doesn't apply this medium-term sales purchases ratio, and it jumps around. If you use the medium-term sales purchases ratio to calculate your GVA, you get a more consistent, steady growth in total GVA over any of the time periods. I think it's pretty implausible that total GVA fell between 2014 and 2015, or between 2016 and 2017-18 versus the solid line. So everything else will be using from here on, we'll be using this final line for the total GVA of this growth for these core industries being calculated using the medium-term 18-month sales purchases ratio. So does this solid line actually look like what we're expecting it to? In growth rates, yes. There are some levels terms differences. So starting off with the VAT turnover, this is VAT turnover over time in trillions of pounds versus the total from the annual business survey, the total from the ONS's monthly business surveys, and the total from national accounts, although the national accounts doesn't include retail, so that's only a dotted line here. Essentially showing actually the VAT turnover does line up more or less well with what the ONS is already getting from the monthly business survey, the monthly retail sales index, and other sources. The industry coverage changed a small bit, which is what's mainly driving this difference in these lines here. And already the annual business survey isn't exactly agreeing with the ONS's monthly business surveys, for example. If we convert this graph, though, and I just index to 2019, I think, then more or less the data sources are showing similar stories. From 2019 onwards, they're showing quite similar growth rates, although there are a few differences in the middle of the 2010s in the different data sources. Again, following them back, they more or less start at the same place, have recession, grow similar rate through to 2019, COVID recession, grow similar rate through to the 2020s. Intermediate consumption, showing the difference in the turnover and intermediate consumption lines, more or less the same. The levels difference is bigger this time, but the path is still tracking. What you get for the total GVA number is a total GVA number that's a bit less. So ABS and national accounts total GVA basically agree, because the national accounts balancing process is already not doing too much, and the ABS is already agreeing with most of the other data that goes into the balancing process. The VAT data is systematically lower. VAT data for GVA is about 5-10% lower level. We can talk a bit more about why this would be, but if I just rebase this to 2019 again, more or less the GVA from the VAT is growing at a similar rate to the national accounts and a similar rate to the annual business survey. The difference is in the 2008 recession, and the difference is in 2022 and 23 of the Russia crisis. And we can also talk a bit more about why those particular places have differences. Just to show you that chart as a table. National accounts GVA falling 20% for this 5-year period versus the ABS minus 24%, VAT data minus 23%. The VAT data GVA is basically marrying with the ABS. Same in the 2010s, the ABS and the VAT GVA, although they fall more, they're recovering faster versus the national accounts. So national accounts grows 40%. ABS GVA and VAT-based GVA estimates 44-45%. The differences are growing in the 2020s. So national accounts GVA grows 20%, VAT GVA grows 24%. Actually, the VAT GVA, the ABS GVA is growing 24%. The VAT GVA is growing 26%. Due to the difference in turnover and intermediate consumption opening up a bit versus what the national accounts has. The annual business survey 2024 results haven't come out yet, but 2023 into 2024, the VAT data is actually, for those 2 years, growing quite fast. Already having higher turnover growth than what the monthly business survey is reporting, even though for the 4 years, the turnover growth versus the monthly surveys is pretty good. So there are many elements of consistency, but also particular years could take more investigation of why the data is behaving in slightly different ways. Overall, the takeaway is similar levels of growth over time. Without this, there's no point continuing. So it's important to check that. The second way of checking is this data actually useful is looking at the firm level responses. So what is the VAT's firm level? What is the difference between what an individual company is reporting on its VAT forms for turnover, expenditure, and the estimate for GVA through this procedure versus what is the annual business survey that the same person, the same firm is sending to the ONS? There are substantial numbers of companies with substantially different numbers, which is in many ways inevitable. And there are different ways in data processing, especially with the large companies. This are being reporting over a large group where large differences can occur because otherwise because it's difficult to track just how each entity is coming in and out of the group and how the group is reporting on a different consolidated bases for its annual business survey responses versus how it's reporting on a different basis to the way it consolidates for its VAT reporting. Even then, there are still large differences for simple firms where this firm is a small 20-person company that really shouldn't have any business reporting different numbers to both sides. We see lots of firms that are agreeing strongly and lots of firms that are disagreeing strongly. This is the distribution of growth rates of GVA across firms. So 16% of firms grow between 0 and 10% in 1 year, just to show you firstly what the distribution of growth rates looks like. So it's quite evenly spread. GVA is actually quite volatile. We could have a lot of companies where their GVA grows 50% or their GVA shrinks 50%. Their wages are generally wages and employment are more stable than profits, and GVA is the sum of profits and wages, but GVA does vary. And you can have firms moving in and out of positive and negative GVA. 1 year, if anything, is actually quite a short amount of time. If it is a case of, no, this company genuinely has lumpy purchases and lumpy sales, and it is withstanding that over the cycle, you can have quite large swings in the 1 year level GVA. So this is the distribution of differences. So if I take the company has grown 5% in VAT, and this company has grown 15% in the ABS, how many times does that happen? So we have 11% of the time where a company is agreeing, 0 to 10 percentage points is agreeing, where the company is saying, I've grown 5% versus I've grown 8%, or I've grown 5% versus I've grown 10%. That is basically strong agreement, given the variation in the data sources. We have quite a lot where there's strong disagreement, where the annual business survey is saying this firm has grown 50%, and the VAT is saying this firm has grown less than 0%. Or this firm has grown 75%, and the annual business survey is saying this firm has grown 10%. Roughly half say we can say they're in agreement, or it's a bit less than half. They're in some level of agreement. The best that can be said for this is that it's quite symmetric. We have as many firms that disagree positively as we have that disagree negatively. So if there is error, it's error that's washing out. It's error that's neutral. Given the assumptions that we're making of we're just going to deal with inventories by multiplying by a factor over time, that is definitely going to generate disagreement. We're not expecting agreement, but this is just to show you how much the disagreement is. These are the 1 year numbers. The 5 year numbers are larger because the 5 year growth rates are different. The 5 year growth rates are more skewed to positive over time. You have more firms that grow more over time just because this chart table is survivors only. Just to show you again, over 5 years, the table of the differences, where over 5 years we have a company that is different by more than 50 percentage points growth. We have quite a lot of these companies, but at least it's still symmetric. We have as many companies where the VAT and the ABS are positive versus as many countries where the ABS and VAT are negative companies. We'll see that the aggregate productivity decomposition results will be varying over data specifications because the process that's generating the data is varying this much because of the assumptions that are being made over treating inventories and treating capital expenditure. The consistency is slightly higher for non-complex large firms. It's slightly worse for small firms. Overall, the best we can take is there is a lack of bias, but this will affect the robustness of the results of anything that we use this data for. If the smoothing of inventory was not neutral, again, though, that would be something to be much more worried about at this stage. Okay, finally, the aggregate productivity decomposition results. What does this data say about productivity growth that matters to policymakers, that matters to how we think about how the economy is functioning? Methodology notes, everything is 2023 prices. Everything is still the core industries. The core industries are about 60% of total GVA. So this is not the full UK economic growth breakdown. And this is not a chain volume measure. This is the aggregate productivity decomposition formula I've applied to the data. We have total productivity change, delta pi, which is the sum of a firm that is a weighting of the within firm growth rates, the firm level lowercase pi growth rates weighted by their shares of the economy, plus the change in the shares of the continuers, weighted by their own productivity and importance to the economy. So how much economic growth comes from a firm increasing its productivity, everything else held constant, plus how much productivity is coming from a firm increasing its weight in the workforce and weight in the workforce distribution, holding constant its productivity over time. And then the equivalent entrant and exit contributions. The entrant and exit contributions are benchmarked to the existing set of continuers at the point of entry and the existing set of continuers at the point of exit, by the point of entry and by exit. And these are the results. So these are 5-year intervals to sort of let the companies grow. And these are annualized numbers. So between 2005 and 2010, within firm growth contributed 0.5 percentage point to overall aggregate productivity growth of the industries. Between firm growth, 0.2 percentage points, and net entry, 0.7 percentage points. 70%, 0.7 percentage points. Over the 2010s, so averaging the growth rates for the 5-year intervals over the 2010s, net entry is not contributing. Between has grown a bit, within has fallen a bit, but the main difference is that the contribution to productivity growth from net entry was occurring before 2010. There is no productivity growth through net entry in the 2010s. Happily, by 2024, we have a bit more net entry. So if we take all of the companies that have entered since 2019, all of the companies that have exited since 2019, and how that has affected the productivity distribution in 2024, it's a bit higher. And within firm growth is a bit stronger. So comparing 2019 and 2024, within firm, all of the continuers in 2019 that are now left in 2024, they're 1% higher per year, or their within firm growth has contributed 1% productivity growth per year for each of the 5 years, which is faster than they've ever done before, roughly. Those are the two main changes: fall in net entry and slightly higher within firm growth. Net entry happily has recovered a bit. Most of the work on the net entry is on the entrance side. So entry is always unproductive. These are new entrants that have entered at any point between 2019 and 2024. Even if you enter in 2019, by 2024, you're still probably not quite up to the industry level productivity. So the entry cohort is always less productive, but it's been particularly unproductive. The fact that the entry cohort is usually less productive is always outweighed by the exit cohort. Usually firms exit for a reason, which is that they're not productive enough and are being outcompeted by all of the other companies. So exit is almost always positive. And pretty much the exit component is large enough to outweigh the entry component. The market is working. If it was the other way around, it wouldn't be, but we do have years where it actually is the other way around, where the entry component is high enough, is low enough productivity that the overall net entry is negative. Mostly it's on the low productivity entrants rather than the not quite enough low productivity companies exited, even though the exit contribution has fallen a bit. This changes depending upon how you put the table together. So if you change the outlier filter strength by small degrees, you can still actually have quite a large impact on the results. So between 1% within firm growth, 2019 to 24, to 0.5% within firm growth. That's quite a large difference. The within firm growth is being driven by quite a lot of large outliers. The other components a bit less. Even so, there are still some large outliers in the entrance side as well, and the exeter side. I'd note as well this 1 percentage point within firm growth. That is also what's driving the difference between the national accounts and the VAT data, as noted. 2023 and 2024 are the particularly strong years where the VAT data is growing quite fast relative to some of the other data sources. That fastness is within firm growth. It's the same firms as before that are reporting very strong productivity growth. Take off a few of them as outliers, you get quite a bit less productivity growth. How does this change by size of firm? Not much, actually. So by size of firm, the within firm growth being stronger is, as much as the within firm growth varies by the different outlier specifications, it's still stronger across all of the size bands. The lower entry falling and then recovering a bit, that is also the case pretty much across all of the size bands. The main difference, is exit is a large size band change. So if we just look at the exit contribution from the smaller size bands for SMEs, 2005 to 2010, 1 to 9 firms produced 0.5 percentage points to the economy by exiting. By exiting the least productive small firms, that added to our productivity by 0.54 percentage points. 2019-24 by 0.53 percentage points. 2010s, 0.49 percentage points. The exit contributions of the smallest firms and the medium firms don't change that much, which is, well, maybe not surprising for COVID because we spent a lot of money keeping companies alive, although that's only 2020 and 2021, and then we have economic shocks post-2021. Nonetheless, there was a massive financial crisis in 2005-2010. Post that, there's not that much extra firm entry. It doesn't look like it's the case that the economic cycle is causing more exiters to exit in a way that is changing the productivity distribution. Lower productivity companies are exiting whatever. Maybe if there is an effect, it's that firms are scared to enter in 2008, 9, 10, and firms only enter later on in the 2010s. So we have more bad entrants that are sort of bunching up rather than entering earlier and then exiting as normal. Or other factors in the 2010 of we have a larger cohort of entrants that are worse entrepreneurs or are able to use their property wealth and are able to use cheaper interest rates to stay alive a bit longer than they otherwise would. But less productive entry cohorts. I say the entry cohort is anyone who's started in 2005 up to 2010. So the entry cohort is anyone who started in 2005, 6, 7, 8, or 9 at the point in 2010, and same for the others. So it's on average the entrance of about 2.5 years to grow before they get counted in this entry component. So this is 2.5-year-old companies used to be more productive than they are now. This slide says what I just said. I just note, and this is coming from the VAT data. The annual business survey is not collecting nearly enough information on small young firms, but the small young firms all have to fill in VAT reports. Maybe the small young firms are filling in VAT reports in a more biased way than they used to, and that's what's being picked up. But That's the main driver of the aggregate productivity decompositions. This is just another robustness table showing if I take the top 50 and bottom 50 contributors to the story and exclude them as extremes, what is the story in the middle? Roughly the same. The extremes sort of cancel each other out on either side. So we still have stronger within firm growth, apart from in specification 3, but more or less similar between firm growth. The top and bottom 50 companies are the largest companies. So they add up to about 1 million workers each. In conclusion, there's mixedness to the data. We can find lots of cases of inconsistencies, and we can find particular years where the data is going in different ways to what we're expecting, and the outlier filtering matters. Lots of the data, lots of the individual differences are being driven by different outliers, or outliers can skew the story of the individual results quite a bit. So that's why I've shown a few different specifications here, which means that this is not a source of replacing business surveys. It would, the value from having the business surveys is definitely sufficiently great to justify the time and expense of ONS and businesses filling them in. If the VAT data was a lot more consistent with the business surveys, then maybe I'd say something different, and that actually the information on VAT forms can be used to replace some of the information getting from the surveys, and there could be an efficiency saving, but the efficiency saving is so tiny in staff time versus the benefits to having the data. Also, the monthly business survey runs faster than VAT, and that's what feeds in the fastest GDP numbers. And in terms of productivity growth, worse entry, lower dynamism. Happily, the entry does seem to have got a bit better in the 2020s. And a bit more growth in the 2020s is coming from higher within firm growth, although you start to look across the different specifications. And over to Nick. Thank you for listening.
As if by magic. So apologies for the drama with my Teams. I don't know what the hell happened, but I'm back on the browser. So I have got some comments. I do want to be quick because I'm sure there's a lot of people on the call who have got more considered observations. So, well, first off, thank you so much for the privilege of being a discussant. I did enjoy, and I think I was effective at the ONS as director. I joined the ONS from the Treasury, where I was sort of in charge of forecasting. So I've always been a bit entrepreneurial, you know, with the data and the economic assessment and different sources. So I'm a less purist, and I always sort of think it's difficult to be worse off with more information if you exploit it sensibly. So I think, you know, a synthesis is useful. Thirdly, and this is the last of my personal observations, I do think it's fair to say that the VAT data wouldn't be here without me, although I'm clearly not a sort of sufficient condition. And you might say, how so? So when I joined the ONS, I went door to door meeting all of the teams, and I met 3 people working with this interesting VAT data, and that was a bit of a eureka moment for me. So VAT, along with PAYE, formed the sort of central part of my push for the Bean review, and also the scanner data, but that seems to have taken a bit longer. So we can all thank Mark Stevens, wherever he is now, and an unnamed student for bringing us here together today. So I'll turn to sort of more sort of substantive comments. So I've not read all the papers in the motivation, but I did, and I have read the way of Phil Wales and Al that sort of linked the VAT, the PAYE, and the trade data to infer productivity differences between firms. And that is a very powerful early paper. I think the longitudinal point is absolutely compelling. You cannot do this analysis. I suppose you could use the subset of the ABS, but the sort of sample rotation does destroy the sort of panel data. And the US, I mean, obviously I'm out of this field, but the US does have a an exemplar record and a firm level approach. So I think my fundamental point is that the VAT data is not perfect, but we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I've always sort of thought, how do we know which source is true? Is the ABS true or is the VAT data true? So I've argued that I find it hard to believe that firms take more care with the ONS than they do with HMRC, or that they keep two books for the same question. But clearly this research does show that we do get two answers to more or less the same question. And I guess if only we had three estimates like employees, then we might have a sort of outlier. I think I'm in, the big picture, given how noisy surveys are, I'm really impressed how close the alignment is. And I think if you're surprised at the differences, then you should consider how weak the surveys can be. So my shorthand is that surveys offer a sort of perfect question, often with a very imperfect sample, whereas the admin data sort of sometimes offers an imperfect question with a perfect sample. So there's trade-offs here, but sometimes in turnover the alignment can be very close. I did notice that yes, firms are sort of incentivized to report purchases, and then we know that cash incentives work, so that's in a favour here. But I do note the bias for GVA on turnover. We always understood the difference between business expenditure and intermediate consumption, but I guess it's not flagged. But are we taking it as a given that the sort of VAT turnover and the sort of ABS turnover is sort of completely congruent? That would be an interesting point. And I'd also note on CapEx, a very long time ago, I did sort of push HMRC into sort of coughing up a CapEx number out of investment allowances. So there is some admin data there that, in theory, though different, could again be exploited. I mean, on the business register, they're sort of, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert, they're constructed largely from VAT returns, PAYE, and Companies House. So it's sort of, we take all the VAT data to build a register, and then we send them surveys to ask them how much turnover there is. So it's sort of, the VAT data is kind of closing the loop in that sort of sense. I think apportionment and reporting unit challenges, I think there's some sort of common challenges to the ABS and the VAT, so I'm not sure that's a deciding factor between them. So the focus here, and I guess the real novelty, is the intermediate consumption, and I'm astonished how close it is, though you could argue that we're sort of taking a long moving average to iron out the bumps. But the other thing is, the timing. We used to have to, we wait years to confirm whether we had a recession, where I suppose the VAT does give us a sort of much closer real-time read on the economy. Now I have a few more technical points. I mean, on the productivity, what deflators are used and at what level? So I take it that it's a sort of industry deflator applied to firms. And then in the productivity, what jobs are we using? Would it be PAYE employees? Just lodge that there. And coming back to this sort of longitudinal point, I think you say that the ABS doesn't have enough observations to track the productivity of cohorts. So I've been more focused on the sort of statistics, but on the economics, it's quite interesting that post-financial crisis, it was Ben Broadbent who sort of originated, or at least was credited with early hypothesis that it was the reduced reallocation of resources that was depressing productivity. And I remember that at the time. And I haven't got into it, but I can see that the net entry was negative from 2010 to 2019. So, are we concluding that reallocation of the workforce has slowed since 2010? On the COVID effect, I mean, the COVID recession was massively subsidised. So, and I do think also that the furlough scheme was badly designed. So I'm not surprised that we don't get that sort of cleansing effect because there was so much subsidy. So I'll stop there, and I have many anecdotes about VAT, which I'll spare the audience. But I'm grateful for all the work for you and others, and this is clearly a fantastic contribution. So I'm very positive about this agenda. And I can't see it as yes, it's difficult, but you know, if you're looking for perfection, well, it's going to be, you're not going to find it. So thank you. Okay.
Thanks very much, Nick. So Russell, do you just want to take a moment to respond to the Nick's discussion, in particular, you know, this point about, you know, which is the truth, so
yes, no, thank you very much, Nick. And yes, that is part of the paper, is actually just because there is enough VAT data already inside ONS that I could use for this, which is due to Mark Williams and massive amount of other people in ONS, as well as Nick, to time that. So on the consistency and ABS versus other data sources, possibly there is actually just an element of what the companies know at each point in time. It's only when the companies do their annual accounts, and for the company level data, the later moving company level data sources are more accurate. Maybe there's something around that. There's definitely, companies have an incentive to look like they have less GVA in VAT. If you're wondering if you're allowed to count something as VAT expenditure or you're not allowed to count something as VAT expenditure, and the HMRC helpline doesn't get back to you, you think, well, they're not getting back to me, I'm not going to look at this, I'm going to add it to my expenditure because I make more money that way. And it so happens that's the bias in the level that turns out of we have higher expenditure reported consistently in VAT than we do in ABS. The turnover is better. The turnover consistency is better between the two sources. The inconsistency is being driven by the intermediate consumption, although none of the consistency is perfect. In terms of which of the data used, so the deflators are the national accounts deflators, applied in the same way the national accounts do, except for the chain volume measures. And there are still some differences because the total VAT number is stronger in 23 and 24. The employment data is from the IDBR. So from what the IDBR holds, it's from what the IDBR holds from the income tax data that is going into the IDBR. And yeah, so yes, the IDBR is filled about half from ONS sources, about half from HMRC sources. So ONS use HMRC VAT turnover to inform the survey weighting, and there's a cycle, so that it's still old turnover that's used to inform the weighting for the next year. And then for the productivity growth, the entry and the exit rate grew in the recessions. It's the productivity implications of the exit. So is the recession helping us because we're actually pushing some even less, we're pushing firms that would be low productivity, as sort of below average productivity, but are still surviving a good year, and they don't survive in a recession year. And if we get rid of them and they get reallocated into a productive company, that's good for the economy. It does seem like the productivity implication is the same over time for the SMEs of whatever companies at whatever levels are exiting, the productivity implication is the same of they're adding up to this many low productivity workers that are exiting. Same in the 2010s, same in the 2005-2010 period, and same in the 2020s. It maybe the margin seems to be how they are re-entering, if these are the same workers that move across into entrance, or how the entry cohort of entrepreneurs and young firms that comes from all across the economy enters, and how difficult they have to break in versus other reasons why they might be, or how much difficulty they have breaking in versus other reasons they might be growing their productivity less quickly.
Okay.
Better give the audience a shout. We've only got 5 minutes left.
Yes.
Yes. I'll,
so
Well, yes, there's a couple of questions from the chat, so I'll just them quickly. So James and Edinson both have questions which are basically about research applications of the data. So James Phipps is asking about how the data would be great value for evaluations, support for small business, medium-sized enterprises, and Edison's about its use for studying agglomeration effects. So if you have very quick thoughts on kind of its use for those sort of research applications. Yeah.
So yes, so James,
there's another question after that.
Sent from Nick.
Yes.
Yeah. So James, this is definitely motivating a lot of the work of can we get good data that we can say, okay, and this is particular program evaluation measure that is using these different outcome measures, and this is an extra measure to add to the set of outcome measures you can use for firms. Definitely. And that's why it's so important to look at the distributions of where this disagrees with the ABS. If we find that the VAT data growth rate is systematically biased, then it's not very much use for that. But already very, very keen to try and incorporate it. And same with Nick's point, trying to incorporate more HMRC data. So there's other work trying to incorporate more HMRC data into this. And then, yes, also this is be very useful for the study of agglomeration effects because you can look at all of the companies and how close they are together. And yes, if the margin is intermediate consumption versus not. Generally, the intermediate consumption measure it adds extra variation. It's not the most variation being added. Companies do also, the reason the medium-term estimates work is because it is quite consistent across companies.
And then Nick also asked about the
2005-10. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I had the same thought. I mean, so we want to look at the productivity slow down, and mixing the recession in that period is yes. So
and the timing of the recession as well, as that affects how companies' reporting periods are different. So many companies work on financial years rather than calendar years, which does matter for 2008-9. The variation matters for the outlier filters. It matters for the interval choices as well. So 2004 to 09 or the 2006 to 11 or 2007 to 12 also give you similar levels of differences to the different outlier filters. So you can still get the within firm effect is growing by this much and then by this much again, depending on the outlier filters, depending upon the interval choices as well. So the entry results are a bit more robust across different data specifications than the within firm results because they can vary for different windows exactly for this, which are affected by areas such as timing and the blue SCoE want even more than the capex from the corporation tax. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. So I'm going to chuck in a very, very quick point, which is about creative destruction and missing growth. So there's been work in economics on the role of increasing product varieties, increasing the role of dynamism actually in creating missing growth. And the more churn you have, the more mismeasurement you potentially have in growth if you don't account for that in the deflators. And this looks like a very ideal data set to study that question in the UK context. Okay, we've got 1 minute left, so maybe it's time to just thank Russell for his excellent presentation. Thank you to Nick for his thoughtful discussion. We've got another ESCoE webinar coming up on March 26th. That's Josh Martin. He'll be talking about labour productivity estimates for detailed industries in the UK, so a very similar topic. So we hope to see a lot of you there. And yes, again, thanks to all of you, the audience, for coming, for taking the time to come and attend. Okay, thank you very much.